All right, are we ready for some more FST, some more statistical work? Just continuing where we left off, there is a display of data called the box and whiskers plot, which, as you can see, it consists of a box, and the box goes from the first quartile, or the lower quartile, which in this case would have been 19, to the upper quartile. The inside of the box is marked, and that is the median, which in this case looks to be about 21.8 or so. That can be anywhere inside the box. It's not necessarily right in the middle. And then we've got what they call the whiskers that go out on each end, and they go out as far as the lower extreme, which is the minimum value, and then it goes out to the maximum value on the upper end. Okay, so when making one of these, the first thing you should do is make your number line and just include the numbers that are in this set and a little bit more. Okay, scaling it equally throughout, and then place your box. Locate your median, and then add your whiskers. And finding outliers. Now, in a lot of cases, your outlier is just a very obvious number, and there really isn't a lot of calculations to do. It's just a data value far different from the rest is an outlier. Now, technical formula for this is the interquartile range, which we've talked about, is the difference between the upper and the lower quartile. So to find the outliers, you would take 1.5 times that interquartile range. That 1.5 is a constant that does not change. Whatever you get for that number, you would add that to the upper quartile, and that's your upper limit. You would subtract that same number from the lower quartile, and that would be your lower limit. And then any data points that are outside these limits is considered an outlier. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. All right, so given this number set, I'm just going to work through computing the stats that we've talked about. So first of all, in this particular number set, if we go through our measures of center, we could calculate the median. In this case, the numbers are arranged in order. There are 10 numbers, so the median would be the average of these two. They're both 27, so your median would be 27. Your mode, the one that occurs most often. In this case, 27 is counted twice, so that would be your mode. The mean in this situation, we would just add up the data and divide by 10. So I'm adding 3 plus 19 plus 22 plus 24 plus 27 plus 27 plus 28 plus 32 plus 34 plus 35. That's 251. Divide that by 10 numbers, and your mean would be 25.1. One other statistic that we have not talked about is range. That's simply your maximum minus your minimum. Max minus minimum. So in this case, 35 minus 3, that range would be 32. All right, the other stats that we've talked about, the first quartile is the median of these 5 numbers. There's 5 of them, so the middle is 22. That's your first quartile. Your third quartile would be the median of these 5, and that would be 32. Therefore, our IQR is 10, third quartile minus the first quartile. If I was asked to determine outliers, I would take 1.5 times 10, which is 15. I would add that to the third quartile. I would subtract that from the first. So that gives me a limit of 7 and 47. And in this case, 3 is not in there, so the number 3 would be considered an outlier. If I was to make a box and whisker plot like for this one, I would set up a number line. I would scale it. I'm just scaling this one by 5s, making sure I include all the data. And then I would have a box from my first quartile, which is 22, about right there. And the box would go to 32, which is about there. The median is 27. And then my whisker would go to my minimum value, which is 3. And it would go to the maximum value, which is 35. In some cases, they will construct a box and whisker plot like this. Instead of going out to the maximum, they would go out to the range if it's still involved. So 47 was the upper limit, but 35 is the largest number. I would stop at 35. The 7 is the lower limit. So I would go to 7, and then I could just put an X at the 3, denoting that that's an outlier. That's another way that you might see a box and whisker plot demonstrated. Just another example of a number set. This is a little bit different set. There's 9 numbers. So in this case, median, there is an exact middle. That would be 340. The mode, there's none that occur more than once, so there would not be a mode. The mean, we would add these numbers up. Just bear with me. And my mean would be 356.1 repeating. The range in this example, maximum minus minimum, 490 minus 301, which would be 189. Other stats I could find, first quartile is going to be there's the median of these 4, which would be the average of those 2. So if I would add those up and divide by 2, my first quartile would be 327. My third quartile would be the median of these. So the average between 352 and 380, which would be 366. That means my IQR, subtracting those, would be 39. If I take 1.5 times that IQR, so 1.5 times 39, which would be 58.5. I could subtract that from the first quartile, add it to the third, and that's going to give me my limits. So 327, take away 58.5 is 268.5, and 366 plus 58.5 is 424.5. Now in this case, only the 490 is not inside those values. That would be considered our outlier. To do my box and whisker plot, I'm going to scale this one by 50s. And then my box would go from 327, which is about there, to 366. The median is at 340. And then I would go to my minimum of 301. And I would go out to my maximum of 490. And that would be my box and whisker plot.